Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the analysis of YOLENO TV. I hope you're well from wherever you're watching this channel. Now, when you see someone like US Senator Jim Risch deliver a statement that talks about cutting US bilateral relationship with a country, you should know that that issue is one that the Senate has considered as a grave issue. The messages that come from Jim Risch are not things that you can just assume. Now, talking about Jim Risch, ladies and gentlemen, we all know him that he's a ranking member and chairman of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. So much of his focus is on how to counter Russia, China, the influence of these countries in Africa. So he's always focused on Russia, China, and any other country that competes with US in conquering Africa. Now, let me take you to a statement which Jim Risch delivered. And Jim was reacting to the elections of Tanzania. I say elections in quote because according to him, he has said that there was no election. What happened is that there was already a predetermined result which was supposed to just be pronounced. That is why, according to him, he looks at 98% as a crazy figure that someone can actually get. So I want to take you to an elaborate statement that Jim Risch has shared. And this statement talks about what he perceives concerning Tanzania. And ladies and gentlemen, the whole thing is all about election and the mistreatment of the Tanzanian citizens. And this is what the report says. On Wednesday, October 29, Tanzania held elections marred by state-sponsored political repression, targeted abductions, and manipulations. Tanzania election was decided well before October 29. In response to these less than credible elections, Tanzanians took to the streets to display their deep frustration and anger. Unfortunately, instead of heeding calls for reforms and electoral transparency, the government of Tanzania's heavy-handed security response resulted in the death of hundreds and the abduction and imprisonment of many more. Tanzania has expressed an unprecedented level of violence over the course of the election. Internet shutdowns, disrupted business operations, limited communications, and left Tanzanian citizens isolated. Tanzania's ruling party has created an environment of fear that challenges the security of the country and neighboring countries. For decades, the US-Tanzania relationship has been built on shared democratic values, global security, economic prosperity, and strategic investment. Tanzania's continued pivot from the rule of law, reform, and good governance demands a genuine assessment of the US bilateral relationships with Tanzania. Ladies and gentlemen, that message is available when you go to foreign.senate.gov/press/dem/release/Shahim Risch statement on Tanzanian election. That is where you get this statement. So it's a statement that I just quote directly from the portal, ladies and gentlemen, the portal of Senate. Now, I started off by telling you that Jim Risch, his major concern is on looking at the relationship between US and countries he identifies. Again, he looks at how best to counter Russia, how best to counter China, how best to counter, countries like India, all those. So he's looking at every possible way, that is his role, to make sure that US does not suffer when it comes to that kind of those kind of relationships between African countries and those other countries. So his focus is on US first. So he has called for reform. He has talked about the election. In fact, according to him, there was no election. what happened, according to him, is that the electoral chief had organized a sham election to just create an impression that they were conducting an election. And then, on the last day, constitutionally, knowing that the time frame had already lapsed, he just hands over a certificate to the winner who's gotten 98%, a crazy figure, and then says that cannot be contested. If I remember, he said those elections cannot, the election results cannot be contested. In other words, he was saying that his word is final. But that was happening at a time whereby Tanzanians were on the streets complaining, demonstrating against reforms that were needed, electoral reforms. Also, you understand, Chadema had boycotted the elections, so they were not happy that Chadema is the party they wanted to vote for. But these people are not on the ballot. So that was also a sign that they were not happy. So if Jim Risch can go to an extent of talking about review of bilateral relationships with Tanzania, that's a very strong statement. Remember, when Rigathi Gachagua toured US, Jim Risch also surfaced with a statement about reviewing the relationship between Kenya and the US and the issue of non-NATO ally status. And that came at a time whereby Kenya was talking about China, defending itself on the relationship with China. And you know, US is not pro-China. So anything that happens with China, they always want to run away from that kind of bilateral agreement. But again, there is a review that is already going on. The first year, so we're just waiting for time before that report is tabled, whether that review should be done, because it's like a preliminary report that will guide the US on the way forward regarding the relationship with Kenya. You know, talking about these things are they mean a lot to our country. For example, the issue of AGOA. You know, AGOA always guarantees that there is more export EPZ, so they create a good opportunity for the EPZs. So when AGOA deal lapsed between Kenya and the US, it meant there had to be some kind of review. But we don't know whether that has been done. I'm just going to check whether it's been done. But what happened is that US was slow on deciding. So we had expected that because J.D. Vance was going to come to Kenya to probably have some talk with the Kenyan government. Unfortunately, because Trump issued a directive that no US staff will visit will be part and parcel of G20, it meant J.D. Vance was not going to come to South Africa, and as a result, J.D. Vance was not going to come to Kenya, because he was to come to South Africa for the G20, then pick countries which he was going to visit. So one of the countries he had chosen was Kenya, but because Trump cancelled that meeting, cancelled the attendance, it meant then coming to Kenya was going to be a challenge. So the issue of AGOA is still out there. And then there's the issue of non-NATO ally status. So when Tanzania is being told that US is going to consider assessing US bilateral relationship with Tanzania, that should send strong warning to Tanzania. It's not business as usual, and businesses will collapse, and US citizens will not most likely invest in Tanzania. Many of them will shy away from investing in Tanzania because of such statements. So, ladies and gentlemen, what do you think about Jim Risch's statement on Tanzania? He says there was no election. Oh, there was no election, ladies and gentlemen. But this is what also Chadema keep on maintaining.
There was no election in Tanzania. So whatever the numbers they are declaring in Dar es Salaam, that President SAMIA, because she can't be called a president right now, she doesn't deserve to be called a president. She has not been elected by the people of Tanzania, so she has no that legitimacy, and therefore we don't recognize anything that has been declared right now, because it is a fake result from a fake election, and therefore there is nothing like 97% or whatever the numbers they would have decided to declare.
Remember, Chadema leaders went into exile. They ran to Kenya, so they have been giving some press statements, but in Kenya, because in Tanzania there's a lot of fear there. They can be arrested again. You know what is happening with Tundu Lissu? Tundu Lissu was out. When he came back, there was a lot of threat, and then suddenly he was arrested. He has been in custody for almost the better part of this year. So, ladies and gentlemen, what do you think about Jim Risch's statement? let us review the US bilateral relationship with Tanzania. So perhaps if you're watching this video and you've not subscribed, take 1 second and subscribe, like this video. Until you catch up again, stay safe and stay blessed.